Something that stands out very obviously when you're looking at Dublin and Cork this weekend is the player retention over the years. It's something that I've spoken about before that separates Dublin from other teams, is that Dublin can hold on to their players for so long and hone them for so long, whereas other player teams are hemorrhaging players over the years. Like Cork, they last met Dublin in 2013 in the championship at Croke Park. Seven of their players are remaining, some of whom are starting this game, like Tom Clancy, Tomas Clancy, James Lockery, Mark Collins, John O'Rourke who's on the bench, Brian Hurley, and Paul Kerrigan who's on the bench as well. Whereas Dublin have 13 guys remaining from that team in 2013. Dublin have just announced their team, and just to call it out there, it's Stephen Cluxton in goals, uh, Davy Byrne, Michael Fitzsimons, Philly McMahon, Jack McCaffrey, Keane O'Sullivan, John Small, Brian Fenton, Michael Dara McCauley, Niall Scully, Cormac Costello, Brian Howard, and a full forward line of Kieran Kilkenny, Paul Mannion, and Con O'Callaghan. So that player retention is just absolutely huge. And just to run through it, the players that they've kept are Cluxton, Johnny Cooper, who's been injured this year, Rory O'Carroll, James McCarthy, McCauley, Keane O'Sullivan, Kilkenny, Mannion, Bernard Brogan, Dean Rock, who doesn't start this game again, Philly McMahon, Kevin McManaman, and Owen O'Gara. Dean Rock is probably going to be more disappointed than most with not starting this game. Came on against Meath and kicked over scores straight away. So you know he's a form player and he can't be too far away from it. I saw an interesting point made by Conor McKeown, who was on Our Game earlier this week, talking about how Leinster is basically like a pre-season now for Dublin. And even I remember doing articles about it a couple of years ago, the widening gap of their margin of victory every year in the Leinster games was growing all the time. And yeah, I think pre-season kind of really hammers that home, and then followed up with the point that they start the Super 8s with a game against Cork, who will be a Division 3 team next year, Roscommon, who will be a Division 2. So it's not like Kerry playing Mayo on the first day out. It's not that same quite level. So they're being eased into this level of the competition. Vinnie Murphy on Twitter was replying to me earlier saying, I think it'll be closer than people think, 10 points or less. Never thought I'd see the day when people would say it would be closer than people think, 10 points. So that really does hammer it home. At this stage now, we'd just be happy with even just a flicker of a contest for a while. And for Cork, I think it's just so huge that they don't get annihilated. If you think of the first day out for Roscommon last year, they got pasted by Tyrone, never recovered from it. And it probably just really sets the team back a long, long way in terms of confidence. And you're probably just going through the motions for the following two games. You've nothing really, the chances of you getting through are so low. So the longer you stay in this, stay competitive in the game, most teams are going to get beaten by Dublin. So if you can have a respectable performance, decent scoreline, then you can bounce back and get a win on the board in your next game, and all of a sudden you're back in contention. So looking at that Cork team, what stands out, goalkeeper, I think be a little bit worried about his kickouts against the better sides. Most of them found their mark against Kerry, but one or two against Laois. I was at that game in Thurles. I just thought, not really sure this Mark White, if he's at the top level just yet, but it is very early days. And I am talking about a couple of kickouts that went like directly out over the sideline. That can happen too, but he'll need to be on top of his game here, because Dublin are as good as anybody at pressing up in your kick-out, so you'd be worried about him to some degree. Ronan O'Toole is he's in for Cillian O'Hanlon at midfield. Cillian O'Hanlon seemed to suffer a head injury against Laois, didn't come back in that game. Ronan O'Toole, who's the brother of Fintan O'Toole, who writes for the 42.ie, he came in, did absolutely fine, so he keeps his place in midfield as well. Luke Connolly stays in the team up at corner or in the inside forward line. Not 100% sure he will start. Didn't have a great game against Laois. Missed a couple of frees that were around the 45 zone. Just didn't happen for him at all. He is a quality player, but not happening. The likes of Stephen Sherlock, Michael Hurley, they came in, did really well. And actually Paul Kerrigan better than any. When he came in, helped set up a goal straight away. Scored one himself. Looked in good form. So they're actually decent options on the bench for Ronan McCarthy. So like I said, just need to avoid that hammering. And I saw an Owen Cormacan article as well. He was talking about how James Lockery, who's the Antrim native, that he's the only player whose age is 30 or above, and he's the only player married on the panel as well. So they are a young team, and like I said, having a decent performance at the very least is very important for them here. The Mayo against Kerry game, that's obviously the big tie of the round. What stands out here, like the Mayo team is a team that was released, leaked and the Connacht Telegraph printed it. So we're not 100% sure if this is actually the team, but there it is beside us anyway. David Clark, Chris Barrett, Brendan Harrison, who had it hard going physically against Damien Comer, but still spoiled him well enough. And the likes of Colin Boyle got back, and it's just that, you know, if he has people around him, obviously he can deal with a physical guy. Like, he's not a huge man, very good player, but yeah, they'll have to make sure that if he's on a big guy or someone good at fielding, like Paul Ganey, like David Clifford, now Barrett will probably go on Clifford, that just to have people around him. The rest of the team then, Keith Higgins, then Lee Keegan is back in. Well, apparently he's back in. Maybe he'll track Stephen O'Brien even, whose pace is a real worry. Colin Boyle, Stephen Cohn, who's a versatile player, Aidan O'Shea, Donny Vaughan, Fionn McDonough, who's been a revelation throughout this championship as far as I can see, Kevin McLaughlin, Jason Doherty, then Cillian O'Connor, Darren Cohn and James Carr. And you wonder if James Carr can weave a bit more magic after that fantastic goal against Galway when no one laid a glove on him. So looking at Kerry, they haven't lost in Killarney in the championship for 24 years. Now, how often have they come up against heavyweights down there? Probably very, very rarely, so I'm not sure how much you can read into that. They lost to Mayo twice in the league, and the league final quite disappointingly, and the same with the regulation game down in Tralee, I think it was. You wouldn't have been blown away by Kerry, and Mayo's ability to run up the centre and finish both games stronger as well, it must be said. There was the sweeper a couple of years ago under Eamon Fitzmaurice as well, the last time they met in the championship, and Mayo won the replay there by 5 points. So without doubt, Mayo have nothing to fear from Kerry. They know there is that weakness there in terms of defending their running game. So Paddy Durkin is the one. He looked to pull up late against Galway, so he's out of the team, as well as Diarmuid O'Connor, of course, and Matthew Ruane, who were both rumoured that they'll come back towards the end of the Super 8s, assuming that Mayo are still involved. I saw a tweet from Cormac O'Malley talking about Cillian O'Connor and the fact that he can now take over as the top scorer all time in the championship. And the tweet was, the absolute notion that Cillian O'Connor racked up all his scores in the qualifiers is some BS. Out of his 23 279, 668 came in 11 qualifiers. So he'd be 6th all time at the age of 27 without qualifiers, with 17 211. Retirement age of the top 5 in that list is 34, 34, 34 and 35. So that does kind of ram home how impressive Cillian O'Connor has been over the years. Of course, there are a few games against weaker teams in the Connacht Championship along the way. I think we all remember him scoring a hatful against London once or twice. Now, maybe I'm caught out and that was in the qualifiers, but you know, I mean, there's Leitrim, New York, and there is London in that championship as well. So you can't dismiss that either. For Kerry, I was just looking at Mayo's average scoring per game, and if you take out the New York game, their average is pretty much 213 or 116 in every game. So they got 17 points against Roscommon, 116 against Down, and then 213 against Armagh and Galway. Will it be enough against Kerry? Well, Kerry have posted 115 against Clare and 119 against Cork. So their scoring averages probably aren't a million miles away from each other. So you'd expect this to be a tight game. It'll be a bruising game, but probably a very, very exciting game, and I can't wait for it. The next game to look at then would have to be Donegal against Meath. Donegal still haven't released their team, and during the week Jamie Brennan was at the Player of the Month award with PwC, and he wasn't put up for interview as well, so that would obviously be on the instruction of management. I've spoken with Jamie Brennan a couple of years ago at a press event. Very good, very open to talk, and bit of crack actually as well. He was telling me about a story about when he was a young lad in the home club in Bundoran, that he would have had Davy Fitzgerald up doing a hurling training session with him at one stage as well, and he very much enjoyed that. And yeah, so he's definitely a comfortable speaker. So it's the instruction of management not to go out and talk to the media, and much like Kilkenny and the hurling media briefing this week, is it going to poke the ball over the bar? No. Is it going to kick the ball over the bar for Donegal? No. John Fogarty had a piece about Michael Murphy in the newspaper this week, talking about how Murphy, who's been captain since 2011, he's about to captain the team for his 52nd time in 65 appearances for the county, which is fairly mind-boggling. And you know, against Cavan, I mean, that's the team from the Ulster final up there against Cavan. He lifted the Ulster title for the 5th time in his career, and it's been done 10 times ever for Donegal, so that's outstanding. And to go through that team that started the Ulster final, there's a meaningful back line. There's pace in the half backs, you know, Owen Bowen Gallagher and Ryan McHugh, assuming they both start there. Very good midfield pair and arguably up there with the best in the country in terms of form at the moment, and they've danger up front across all the lines, speed and directness. Murphy, McBurty, Brennan, and not just them either. A lot of players scored heavily against Cavan, who were very poor. Jamie Brennan hit 1-4, McBurty 5, Murphy 4, 3 were frees, and Kieran Thompson and Jason McGee got 2 each. So against Meath did name their team. So just looking at it, their wins so far this year in the championship, they've been against Offaly, Laois, Carlow and Clare. So not exactly too many heavy hitters, and of course lost 117 to 4 points to Dublin in the Leinster final as well. It's the same team as the Clare game the last day. I was at that game. It was an entertaining game, very entertaining game. Mickey Newman and James Conlon, they combined for 1-9. But Newman took a heavy hit when he was in the second half in on goal, and I think he got lamped off the post. I mean, I never saw a replay, but at the time it looked bad. He came off, and I was impressed that the team, when they lost their free taker and one of their marquee men inside, that they didn't fold, because it was a pretty tight game. Remains to be seen whether he is actually okay to play. I note that Brian Menton has scored 3-5 from midfield as well, so that's somebody that Donegal will be looking to keep tabs on. And as I mentioned, they've had a very impressive midfield, so perhaps it's an area where Meath will find themselves a bit more locked down than usual. It's a serious step up compared with playing against Clare and going up to Donegal as well. Very, very tough task. And they haven't been hammered by the number one team in the country. Let's see what they can do against the number two as it's supposed to be at the moment. The full back line, I actually thought the full back line of Meath, so Lavin, McGill and Gallagher, were quite good against Dublin early on with the 50-50 balls that went in, and Dublin don't really send in too many 50-50s, so the balls, they would have been under pressure, and I thought they started quite well. Of course the levy is going to break eventually. No team is going to keep Dublin out for too long, especially if the ball is coming in well, and hard to look past Donegal there. Then the final game of the weekend is Roscommon at home to Tyrone. What stands out for Tyrone is Peter Hart being available. He was going to be getting, he got a black card, his third black card of the season. That's after being rescinded. But I would ask the question, with a couple of his black cards this season, seems to be a case where he puts his foot across first and then shoulders a guy. So there's an element of a foot trip in there, which as far as the rules are concerned, is a black card. So I certainly wouldn't see those being rescinded. And also someone suggested to me, and I'm not necessarily going to say it for sure, but suggested that is a tactic that some players use, that you put your foot in to sort of destabilise a player and shoulder them to sort of hit the floor as hard as possible. Don't know if that's what Peter Hart was after, but definitely I don't like the thought of that. And if there's an element of it or a suggestion of it, just to sort of say to players that sort of a tackle isn't going to be tolerated, black cards should definitely be doled out for that. Tyrone have scored heavily in their last few games. Terrible against Donegal, of course, but the last few games they've scored 120 and 222. That's, in the games against Cavan and Kildare. If they get to the All-Ireland final, they'd have played 11 games at the championship, and that will be a record. Roscommon have that's actually just the Tyrone team from the Cavan game as well. The team hasn't been released yet, so it'll be similar enough to that, you'd imagine. Roscommon, Hubert Darcy, he's in place of Conor Devaney, who limped off against Galway. Obviously we haven't seen Roscommon for a few weeks now since winning the Connacht title, so we'll see how they're getting on at this point. Conor Cox, Enda Smith, Diarmuid Murtagh, Carl Craig, they have very, very good forwards in there. But this time last year in the Super 8s, and Enda Smith has spoken about it in the past week, that they've had a year to think about how you have to play differently at Croke Park to how you'd play in, let's say, the Hyde or somewhere, a smaller ground, a smaller field. So they've had a year to think about it. Last year they were beaten heavily. I think they conceded 424 both against Dublin and Tyrone at Croke Park. So 440 or 848 over 2 games is a crazy amount to concede. So yeah, I mean, Anthony Cunningham, new manager in there. They've actually lost a good back and a good forward this year. Niall McInerney and Kieran Murtagh, they're both away. Obviously Conor Cox is in, so that's a huge change as well. So for Roscommon, how big of a change can they make in the space of a year, especially with Tyrone in this form? You definitely would have to go for Tyrone. They just look very powerful at the moment.